A pale light is spreading over the hills of Galilee. The air smells of wood, smoke, and damp earth after a night's dew. In a small courtyard outside a stone house, a woman bends over a grinding stone. Her name is Miryam. She turns the upper stone from steady hands, crushing barley into meal while the first of her children stirs inside. A clay oven warms in the corner. Water jars stand by the door, cool from the night. From inside comes the small sounds of a household waking, pots shifting, a child coughing, another laughing. Yeshua is nearly grown now, old enough to help his father Yosef at a workbench. Beside him are Yaakov, Yehuda, Yosef the younger, and Shema. Two daughters move quietly, gathering kindling. They are the 7 children in all, strong, curious, always hungry. Miryam straightens her back, brushing grain dust from her hands. She glances toward the lane that leads to the village well, already hearing the chatter of other women starting their day. The rhythm of this life is familiar. Morning chores, the blessing over bread, the reciting of the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The words have been spoken so often that they settle over the house like breathing. Some mornings she thinks about how quickly her eldest has grown, about what sort of man he is becoming. The Romans pass through the roads more often now. The talk of unrest reaches even their small hill village. She worries as any mother would. She remembers the words of the old man Simeon in the temple years ago. How he spoke of a sword that would pierce her heart. At times she wonders what he meant, though she pushes the thought away and hums softly as she works. The baby stirs. She wipes her hands on her apron and steps inside. The room smells of oil and bread. She touches the infant's cheek, then looks at the faces of her other children and feels that mix of weariness and joy that comes with motherhood anywhere in the world. Faith, work, and family, all bound together in a quiet strength of a Galilean woman. A morning like this would have been ordinary in the household of Miryam of Nazareth, the woman we know as Mary, the mother of Jesus. Dr. James Tabor, in his recent book, The Lost Mary, asks us to begin here with the ordinary, before the theology and art lifted her into heaven. She was a Jewish mother in a real village, living under Roman rule, keeping a household, raising children, and holding faith in a world that offered little security. It's in this real human setting that Tabor invites us to rediscover her story. Before theology and centuries of reverence lifted her into heaven, Miryam of Nazareth lived fully on earth. That's where Dr. James Tabor begins in The Lost Mary. His question is simple but profound. What happens if we return Mary to her world, the one she actually walked in, prayed in, gave birth in, and worked in? The book invites us to meet Mary not as a symbol or as an untouchable saint, but as a Jewish woman of the first century, with all the texture and the reality that it implies. This means stepping away from latter traditions that smothered her, that smoothed her story into perfection, and looking instead at how her faith, her culture, and her family shaped her life, and how she in turn shaped the movement that followed her son. Tabor begins with the historical setting. Mary was born, he suggests, sometime around 19 BCE, likely in Sepphoris, a thriving Galilean city only a few miles from Nazareth. Archaeology gives us a picture of that place: stone-paved streets, ritual baths called mikvats, workshops, a mix of Jewish and Hellenistic culture. It was a world alive with trade and tension. Rome ruled through Herod Antipas, and every family in the region felt the pull between faithfulness to Torah and the pressure of the empire. In that world, a young woman like Mary would have married early, probably in her mid-teens. Marriage was not only social expectation, but survival. It linked families and the security community standing. Tabor notes that her husband Yosef may have been a skilled craftsman who worked on building projects in Sepphoris, which would explain the Greek term tekon, often translated as carpenter. Their home then was neither wealthy nor destitute, a working-class household that balanced devotion with labor. This is where Mary's story truly begins, not with angels and songs, but with ordinary life in a world that demanded resilience. She would have lived according to the customs of Jewish women of her time, keeping neda, the cycle of purity after childbirth, observing Sabbath, preparing kosher meals, and joining in the pilgrim feasts when possible. Her faith wasn't ceremonial, it was woven into every small act of the day. Tabor's work highlights that this context matters because Mary's faith shaped the earliest Jesus movement. When we imagine her as fully human, not detached from Jewish law, but immersed in it, we begin to see how the teachings of her son grew out of that home that treasured righteousness, compassion, and justice. As Tabor puts it, Mary's house was not a sanctuary removed from Judaism. It was Judaism in motion, living, breathing, praying. Some Christians might pause here. If we emphasize Mary's Jewish identity too much, do we risk losing her spiritual uniqueness? Tabor's response, and I think it's worth considering seriously, is that the opposite is true. By forgetting her roots, we risk losing the real miracle, that the divine story entered human history through an ordinary, faithful woman. Seeing her as Jewish, as local, as human, doesn't diminish her. It grounds her holiness in reality. Tabor also explores the size of Mary's family. The Gospels mention several sons: Yoshua, Yaakov, Yosef, Shimon, and Yehuda. It also notes unnamed daughters. This would place Mary at the center of a large, bustling family, 7 or more children, which aligns with the rhythms of first-century Jewish households. In that world, motherhood was not a passive calling, it was leadership. The matriarch held the moral center of the home, shaping prayer, discipline, and daily lawfulness. Tabor argues that Mary continued that leadership even after Yoshua's death, that she became, in effect, the matriarch of Yeshua, the Yeshua movement. Early Christian texts hint that she lived in Jerusalem among the first believers, possibly with John or one of her sons. When we read Acts 1, she is there in the upper room, praying with the apostles. Tabor suggests this is not a symbolic mention, but a clue. Mary may have been a living link between Jesus' message and the community that carried it forward. This recenters her role, not as a silent figure overshadowed by men, but as a woman of authority, revered for wisdom and faith. She is the bridge between the Jewish world that raised Jesus and the emerging movement that became his name. When the church later turned her into the Virgin Mother of Heaven, it preserved her sanctity, but lost her humanity. Tabor's Lost Mary tries to restore both. He points out that the earliest depictions of Mary before latter theology expanded her story are strikingly Jewish. She names her son Yeshua. Yahweh saves, the name heavy with Israel's hope. She sings the Magnificat, a song drawn almost line for line from the Hebrew scriptures, echoing Hannah's prayer in 1 Samuel. She and Joseph bring offerings according to Leviticus after childbirth. Every scene in the early gospel narratives sits within the Jewish law and practice. To forget that is to misunderstand her completely. But here's where Tabor's work also raises questions for faith today. If Mary was truly a Jewish mother of her time, observant and earthy, what does that say about later doctrines that made her sinless, untouched by ordinary life? Tabor doesn't argue against reverence, but he asks whether reverence can coexist with realism. He invites us to love Mary not because she was above humanity, but because she was fully within it. That perspective challenges both extremes. The purely mythic Mary of latter devotion and the purely historical Mary of secular historians. Instead, Tabor and others propose a middle way. Mary as a real woman whose life bore divine significance because of its ordinariness. She cooked, prayed, gave birth, endured hardship, and remained faithful. Her greatness was not detachment from life, but presence within it. At this point in our study, it's worth asking, what happens to our understanding of faith when we remember that the holiest moments in history were carried by hands of her like hers? It reframes holiness itself, not as purity from the world, but purity in the midst of it. Mary's holiness wasn't separation. It was devotion expressed through work, patience, and mercy. Tabor's portrayal doesn't contradict the Gospels. It deepens them. It reminds us that the incarnation, the divine entering flesh, didn't happen in a palace or a temple. It began in the home of a Jewish mother who lived her faith so fully that her son learned compassion, justice, and prayer from her. That's theology grounded in history. Some may find this approach unsettling. If we focus on Mary the human, what happens to Mary the saint? But perhaps that's the point of the rediscovery. Not to tear down reverence, but to give it roots. By understanding her humanity, we don't lose the mystery. We see how the mystery works. When we think of her now, not standing on a pedestal, but standing in her kitchen, flour on her hands, calling to her children, we find something sacred in the ordinary. That's the Mary Tabor asks us to meet. Not lost in heaven, but found again on earth. And when we think about it, maybe the real question this rediscovery asks us is whether her story still speaks to us today. We live in an age filled with power and information, yet longing for compassion and meaning. Mary's story reminds us that the divine is not far from the human, that holiness and humility are often the same thing, and that faith is something lived, not displayed. If this study has helped you see Mary, Miryam of Nazareth, in a new light, I'd love to hear your reflections. Share your thoughts in the comments, and please, let's keep exploring these sacred stories together. And if you want to continue this journey through the lives and writings of the early followers of Yeshua, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'm Tad Inoue, and this is Whole Bible Study. Thanks for joining me for this exploration of the Lost Mary. We'll see you again as we continue uncovering the lives behind the Scriptures, chapter by chapter.